Hey guys, Josh from soccerreviewsforyou.com, bringing you a video today that I have been wanting to make for well over a year now. It's taken a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a decent amount of money to make this video possible, but I finally have all the shoes in my possession. So today's video is going to be the evolution of the Nike Mercurial Vapor from 1 to 9. I'm going to tell you guys everything about every single model here, what was significant about this shoe at the time of its release, and how each of their individual features influenced the shoes before them and the shoes after them, because at the end of the day, the Mercurial Vapor series is not only one of the most popular ever, it's also one of the most influential in terms of forming the current modern day soccer cleat market. Again, this is all my opinion, but it's hard to argue that the Mercurial Vapor series has not been revolutionary over the years. So again, starting from the first Vapor, ending at the 9th Vapor, we're going to talk about each individual model. Again, a lot of time and effort went into making this, so if you guys could support the video with a like, it would be greatly appreciated. And without further ado, let's get right into the video. In 2002, we saw the release of the original Nike Mercurial Vapor 1, which in my opinion is the most important modern day soccer cleat of all time. Now the reason I say this is because I think that the Vapor 1 truly did pave the way for all the modern concepts, ideas, and materials that we see in the present day soccer cleat market. Now back in 2002, this shoe did a lot of firsts. The first thing that it did that was completely different from anything else out there is the design of the boot. As you guys can see, it features a one-piece synthetic upper. It's a very streamlined, low-profile, slim-fitting style of soccer shoe, something that had not been seen before up until the release of the original Vapor. And I think that even by today's standards, the Vapor 1 is still a very modern-looking soccer shoe. The other thing that it did first is that it introduced the idea of creating a soccer cleat that was as light as possible. Again, this plays into the streamlined, low-profile design, mainly synthetic upper, minimalist sole plate, and just the overall aesthetics of the shoe scream lightweight and modern innovation. And obviously, the whole theme of making your shoe as light as possible is a theme that is still very prevalent in today's soccer cleat market, and arguably one of the most important factors when somebody is going to buy a brand new top-end cleat. The other thing, and probably the most important aspect of the Vapor 1 when it comes to innovation and really paving the way for future cleats, is the one-piece thin synthetic upper. Now the synthetic upper on this particular cleat was actually called Nike Skin. It's not like the Nike Skin we see now on the Hypervenom Phantom, completely different, similar to a more traditional Mercurial model, and that's a very thin, almost single layer synthetic material. And basically the concept here was not to create a synthetic material that was supposed to feel more leather-like, similar to what we saw on past Mercurial models prior to the original Vapor, but instead create a synthetic material that was designed to provide a completely different feel that wasn't like leather at all. Instead was going to be something more barefoot-like, something that felt like you weren't wearing shoes at all. And this is, again, a concept that was executed very, very well by the Vapor 1 and obviously has stuck around over the years, because at the end of the day, it was truly innovative and truly a fantastic idea. Moving forward 2 years, in 2004, we saw the release of the Mercurial Vapor 2, which in all honesty was not too far off from that original Mercurial Vapor design. Now, all of the same elements remained going from the Vapor 1 to the Vapor 2. You still had your full Nike Skin upper, your external plastic heel counter, the exact same sole plate and stud pattern, and just a general streamlined silhouette of the boot. What had changed were, of course, the graphics on the boot. They weren't all that significant. Of course, you still have your main Nike swoosh on the inside and outside, and a slightly different embossed pattern in the Nike Skin upper itself. But for the most part, all of those same elements remained, and really the major changes were just small tweaks in the overall construction and aesthetics of the Vapor 2 in comparison to the original Vapor design. In 2006, Nike blew everyone out of the water again with the introduction of the Mercurial Vapor 3. Now, not only was the Vapor 3 an incredibly good-looking shoe, in fact, if you ask me, it's one of the best-looking shoes of all time, but it also introduced a lot of new concepts and materials that have kind of stayed true to the Mercurial series with every single model after it, which is pretty significant considering that this shoe is now 7 to 8 years old, depending on when you guys watch this video. Now, as far as what is significant about the Vapor 3, or what's most significant about this shoe, is that it was the first shoe to introduce and feature Teijin synthetic. Now you guys can see how thin it is. It's paper thin. It's designed to provide that nice barefoot feel on the ball, and I'm sure a lot of you guys recognize Teijin synthetic. That's because the Vapor 3 and every Mercurial model after it, even the current ones that we see now, the Vapor 9, still feature Teijin synthetic uppers. Of course, the composition of Teijin synthetic has changed over the years. We've seen different finishes, different thicknesses, but the core material has remained the same, which really goes to show again how far ahead of its time the Vapor 3 was at the time of its release. The other kind of significant aspect of the Vapor 3, in my opinion, that maybe a lot of people haven't really caught on to, is that it's one of the first shoes, I should say, to start using carbon fiber in a way that was more performance oriented. I think that even today, carbon fiber is viewed as an ultra premium, ultra modern type of material. While used in small quantities like it is here, it's not necessarily lighter than plastic would be. And if it is, it's a very, very minute difference. But it's still a type of material that, like I said, is very performance oriented, and it was cool to see it used on the outside of the shoe as well as on the inside of the shoe, mainly in the sole plate area, as you guys can see on the Mercurial Vapor 3. Of course, the current model Mercurials don't necessarily use carbon fiber, they use glass fiber, which is essentially a variation. But again, it just goes to show that the Vapor 3 was, at the time of its release, ahead of its time, and it truly did again pave the way for new materials and new concepts that would then be implemented on pretty much all future models of the Mercurial Vapor. In 2007, we saw the release of the Mercurial Vapor 4, which wasn't as well received as the previous Vapor models. The main point of controversy was really the lace cover that was fixed to the upper of the shoe. It wasn't as aesthetically pleasing, or at least a lot of people didn't find it aesthetically pleasing as the previous Mercurial models, which had a more streamlined look about them without that lace cover. But it also made for a difficult time putting the shoe on and taking it off, just because the lace cover fit very tightly to the boot itself. With that being said, all of the same elements remained the same. Still had that streamlined fit. It still had Teijin synthetic upper. The heel counter design was a little bit different. You found some carbon or glass fiber kind of wrapping the back here, acting as a stabilizer. And of course you had that classic Mercurial stud pattern that just performed really, really well and was totally unique in comparison to everything else out there. But what made the Mercurial Vapor 4 truly innovative and truly exciting, in my opinion, wasn't actually the standard Vapor 4. It was the Vapor 4 SL, which is what I have for you right here. Exactly the same upper, very similar fit, but instead of a plastic sole plate, if you will, you got a carbon fiber sole plate with a carbon fiber external heel counter that was visually very striking, visually very good looking, very modern looking, also very expensive. But this is truly revolutionary in that this is one of the first real full carbon fiber sole plates. It made the shoe lighter, it made the shoe more responsive, and it was also, like I said, a lot better looking in my opinion. This wasn't quite as common as the standard Vapor 4s in terms of where you could get these. Not many stores were carrying them just because of how pricey they were. And in terms of the overall performance, while it did perform well, while it was very responsive and lightweight, there were major durability issues with this particular sole plate. I did have a pair back when this shoe was kind of a current model, and I found that a lot of them did crack. My pair cracked only after a couple playing sessions right here through the midfoot. So obviously there were some issues that needed to be worked out in this sole plate before it actually was kind of a truly viable option. At the time of its release, it was kind of like that ultra premium limited thing that if you had a pair, great, but if you didn't, it wasn't something that was terribly concerning. The Vapor 4 was going to perform just as well, but for the most part, having the full carbon fiber sole plate at the time was truly revolutionary and paved the way for arguably some of the most exciting Mercurial models ever to be released. In 2009, we saw the release of two brand new Mercurial Vapor models, the Mercurial Vapor 5 and the Mercurial Vapor Superfly 1, which is the shoe that I have on the table in front of me. Now, the reason why I'm not showing you a standard Vapor 5 is, one, I don't have one, and two, because the standard Vapor models more or less took a back seat over the next couple of years to the ultra premium, ultra expensive, ultra high-tech Superfly line, which was part of Nike's Elite series that unfortunately we don't see anymore. The Superfly 1 was truly revolutionary and really pushed the boundaries of what a soccer shoe could be when it comes to technology and what new ideas Nike brought to the table with this particular shoe. A lot of the pros who were wearing the Mercurials on TV were wearing the Mercurial Superfly as opposed to the standard Vapor model, which again made this very, very popular, much more so than the standard Vapor 5 was. Now, in terms of new ideas and new technologies that were introduced here, obviously the most prevalent theme on the upper and probably the most noticeable aspect of this shoe in comparison to all Vapors prior to the Superfly 1 was the introduction of Nike Flywire, which is something that Nike still uses frequently on pretty much all of their top-end performance models in every other sport but soccer. So I'm kind of curious as to why that is. I think Superfly is a fantastic idea. Basically, there are these strings that are embossed into the upper that are designed to act like a suspension bridge, in that it stabilizes the upper, keeps it nice and rigid, it wraps your foot when you pull the laces tight, and it creates for a very stable, very responsive feel when making hard lateral cuts. And it just makes a lot of sense to implement Flywire in a soccer shoe. So I'm kind of curious as to why they don't do that anymore. But that was one of the main features. It's the first soccer shoe ever to feature Flywire technology. Of course, you also got kind of the evolution of the carbon fiber sole plate, and even on the Superfly 1, I still think the carbon fiber sole plates did have some durability issues, mainly in the midfoot, where they were cracking. You got that Mercurial stud pattern once again, but again, to save weight and to kind of really push that whole modern, super futuristic design that they had going with the Superfly 1, they hollowed out a lot of the studs, mainly in the heel, which we still see on current model Mercurials, but even in the forefoot, which we don't see anymore, it doesn't really make sense to hollow them out in the forefoot. At the end of the day, it really doesn't save all that much weight, but the visual impact that it had at the time was something that we had never seen before and really made the Superfly 1 such a significant shoe. In 2010, we saw the release of the Mercurial Vapor 6 as well as the Mercurial Vapor Superfly 2. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a Vapor 6 to show you guys, but the significance of that shoe is that it was the first Mercurial model to change up the stud pattern, which the Superfly 2 also did, and it was also the first Mercurial model to feature a full glass fiber sole plate, which we still see today on the current Mercurial Vapor 9. Now, the Superfly 2 is a shoe that I have in front of me for you guys, and this was at the time the more popular, at least the shoe that everybody wanted in comparison to the Mercurial Vapor 6, just because, again, it was what the pros were wearing. It was the most high-tech of the two variations of the Mercurial Vapor. It was also by far the most expensive, retailing at an obscene $400 US, but believe it or not, people did buy them at the time. What is interesting about the Superfly 2, just like the Superfly 1, it was incredibly uncomfortable, but the Superfly 2 in particular is the stiffest soccer shoe that I have personally ever worn. It's actually difficult to wear this shoe. It requires a certain foot type that I personally do not have, and it's just a very rigorous, very difficult break-in period, and even once the shoe is broken in, it still isn't very comfortable, to be completely honest with you guys. Now, as far as the evolution goes, coming from the Superfly 1 to the Superfly 2, still a Tahitian synthetic upper, definitely a lot thicker and bulkier in comparison to that original Superfly, but the durability on these was very, very good. You did have still have that Flywire embossed into the upper itself. Obviously a lot more Flywire, and it was laid out in a completely different pattern this time around. Still made for a very stable feel once you did kind of get the shoe on your foot. And then, of course, you had that brand new stud pattern with the layout of the studs being a little bit different. You still had the cutouts in the stud, as you guys can see, which were circular on this model as opposed to being perfectly round. And then, of course, you had the introduction of the Sense studs, which is something that a lot of pros did not wear. A lot of them just got the standard Vapor 6 stud pattern or even the previous Mercurial model stud patterns put on their shoe instead. But I actually found the Sense studs to work very, very well. The concept was that these two studs here, the middle circular part or conical part, would actually sense the ground beneath you, and depending that the ground was harder or softer, the studs would retract or kind of stick out a little bit further to provide for maximum traction. I found that the stud pattern performed very, very well, whether you want firm, hard, or soft ground playing surfaces. To me, the performance was fantastic, but like I said, a lot of pros opted out of using the Sense studs and just went for a standard Mercurial stud pattern instead. And then, of course, you had, again, a variation on this carbon fiber sole plate, which I think that at this point the durability issues were more or less worked out. I didn't see or hear of too many issues issues of the carbon fiber sole plate actually cracking. And like I said, in terms of durability, the Superfly 2 was actually pretty good. 2011 was arguably the least innovative year for the Mercurial Vapor series, in that we saw the release of the Mercurial Vapor VII as well as the Mercurial Vapor Superfly 3, both of which really didn't do all that much different from the previous models. Again, unfortunately, I do not have a Vapor 7 to show you guys, but really the only difference coming from the Vapor 6 to the Vapor 7 was that Nike removed the lace cover and changed up the fit of the boot in the toe box ever so slightly. Other than that, the boot was exactly the same. Now going to the Superfly 3, which is what I have in my hands here, again, the difference from the Superfly 2 is minimal to say the least. Exact same upper, exact same flywire layout. The only difference here is that they give you one extra lace hole below that top one, so if you wanted your shoes to be extra tight, you did have that option. Of course, the shoes did have an aesthetic difference in terms of the graphics on the boot. The one I have right here is one of the CR7 colorways, which I found to be particularly unique, and I'm really happy that I still have a pair in brand new condition. One of the most unique colorways and just graphics in general to be featured on a soccer shoe, in my opinion. And in terms of the sole plate and stud pattern, nothing had changed whatsoever. You still had your carbon fiber sole plate, the exact same stud pattern with the 2 cent studs here in the forefoot. So for the most part, the only difference coming from the Superfly 3 to the Superfly 2 is that the Superfly 3 was arguably a little bit more comfortable from right out of the box, but for the most part, the difference in performance was non-existent. In 2012, we saw Nike discontinue the Superfly line and really move forward with the Mercurial Vapor VIII, which in my opinion is a shoe that really changed the game and changed the way that a lot of people look at thin synthetic soccer shoes. Not only was the Teijin synthetic upper on this shoe thinner than it had ever been and softer than it had ever been, it also kind of played around with the concept of finishes, which I think is really the latest craze when it comes to soccer shoes in general. Now, this is one of the later models of the Mercurial Vapor VIII, which featured a smooth leather grain finish as well as all conditions control on the upper, but that was part of the later evolution of the Mercurial Vapor VIII, as when it originally relaunched in that bright mango color. I'm sure a lot of you guys remember it. It was very, very popular. Unfortunately, I don't have a pair to show you guys, but the finish on that shoe did not feature all conditions control, and it also featured more of a smooth, almost nubuck peach fuzz-like type of finish on the upper. It made for a very natural amount of grip on the ball, very unusual, unlike anything else we had ever seen before, and the feel was absolutely fantastic. It's an ultra thin Teijin synthetic, truly provides that nice barefoot playing experience, and it was also the first Mercurial in a little while to go back to that streamlined, very tight fit that the Mercurial Vapor was really built off of in the first place. So this is not a shoe that is really tailored well towards wider foot types, had that nice tight fit, and because of that, I think that the overall performance of the shoe really benefited, and that was also very, very responsive. Moving on to the sole plate and stud pattern, we saw an evolution of the glass fiber sole plate with 2 different variations where you're going to find 2 layers of glass fiber in the midfoot and heel, and only 1 single layer in the forefoot, something we still see today. And then, of course, Nike reinvented the firm ground stud pattern. And this is probably one of the most significant changes in comparison to all of the past Mercurial Vapors. They really kind of rethought a firm ground stud pattern in that, why do you need so many studs under your feet? Instead, they designed a stud pattern in really all the major push-off points, all the major pressure points under your foot, so that every single direction that you would push off of, you only need 1 single long, very thin, very sharp bladed stud to get as much traction as possible. And in terms of multi-directional traction and just straight up grip when pushing off in pretty much any direction, nothing at this point in time beats the stud pattern found on the Mercurial Vapor VIII as well as the Mercurial Vapor IX on an ideal firm natural grass playing surface, which is pretty impressive, and again showing that Nike is constantly innovating with the Mercurial Vapor series. In 2013, we saw the release of the Mercurial Vapor IX, which is at this point in time the current model Mercurial. Now, what was interesting about the Vapor IX was not so much the design, as it remained very similar to the Vapor VIII, but more so that Nike played around with textures and finishes to the Teijin synthetic upper. For the first time ever, we had a choice to go between 2 different upper finishes on the Mercurial Vapor series. The first upper variation that was really emphasized at the launch of the Vapor IX was the golf ball-like speed control finish on the main launch colors. This golf ball-like finish is exactly as it appears and as it sounds, like a golf ball, in that there's varying textures on the upper itself. It's not completely flat. Because of this, depending on if you're making softer or harder touches on the ball, the amount of grip would vary as well. So softer touches would result in less grip due to less surface area making contact with the ball, and harder impacts such as shooting the ball would provide more grip because more surface area would make contact with the soccer ball. Kind of a difficult concept to explain, but I think you get the idea. If you didn't want that speed control finish, you wanted something a little bit more traditional, you had the option with certain colorways to go with a smooth leather grain finish. Again, still made from Tahitian synthetic, but instead of being dimpled, it's completely smooth. Provides a slightly different feel on the ball, but for the most part, I think the general concept behind the Mercurial Vapor remains the same, regardless of which upper variation that you go for. But it was kind of an interesting concept by Nike, and I'm curious to see how they're going to move forward with the variation in finishes on the upper. Alright guys, that's it for my video on the evolution of the Nike Mercurial Vapor series from 1 to 9. I think that when you look at the shoes side by side, it really goes to show how long Nike have been innovators in the soccer world. And it also makes me wonder what they're going to do next with the Mercurial Vapor series, because I think at this point they've really proven that the sky is the limit. So if you guys did enjoy today's video, be sure to support it with a like. If you have any questions or comments, be sure to leave a comment down below, and I definitely will get an answer out to you. If you guys are interested in any extra information on soccer cleats and their performance in general, be sure to check out my website, soccerreviewsforyou.com. You can find a direct link to that down below in the description. If you enjoyed today's video and would like to see more, be sure to hit that subscribe button for daily videos on all the latest and greatest soccer gear. You can find all of my social media information down below in the description as well. And other than that, guys, hope you enjoyed today's video. And as always, thanks for watching.